All right, my name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Josh Segal. It's July 25th, 2022. We're at Prufrock in Portland. Thank you so much, Josh, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
The first question, as you know, to get started, is why wine?
Why wine? You know, I've been asking myself that a long time. I could say one reason is my brother, who turned me on to some good wines early on. But other than that, you know, I was a touring musician before I was in the wine business, and kind of a little funny story. In the 90s, I was touring with the Indigo Girls, and on the rider there were a couple bottles of wine. And the rider means like with the food that they just have backstage, and one was an oaky California Chardonnay that I didn't really care for, but the other was always a Shiraz. And so I found myself, you know, at the beginning of the tour, opening that each night. And about a week into the tour, a very famous rock drummer that I had the honor of playing with kind of took me aside and said, you know, you're kind of drinking my wine. I have that on the rider because I don't really drink much, but my wife loves Shiraz, and I kind of just accumulated at the end of the tour. I bring home a couple cases of wine, and I really don't care. You're welcome to drink it, but the reason I bring it up is that, you know, you're welcome to add another bottle to the rider. You should talk to the manager, and then you could just have something else or whatever. And I was like, whoa, great. You know, so I talked to the manager and got some other things on there, and that kind of allowed me to have a bunch of, you know, wine coming in that I could try every night, and it kind of started this, you know, different level of exploration in a way while on tour, and then successively when touring with other artists did the same thing. And so it's a number of years of exploring wine that way, as you know, and beyond. But kind of got me into things, and as years progressed, you know, in the early 2000s, I just found myself reading a lot more about wine than practicing, I guess. And I was working in film music, and I was living in Southern California, working in Hollywood, and nearly got a sales job for this small importer down there, and that kind of fell through. But long story short, you know, my then girlfriend, now wife, and I moved up here in 2004, and I was ready to try something new. And so I got a sales rep job in wine for a small importer distributorship at the time, and started selling wine, and just started that learning curve. I mean, at that time I was so green, you know. I mean, all I knew was you know, Côte d'Aron and Chateauneuf and a few other things. And you know, I'd just go into wine shops and, you know, just like introduce myself and talk about music as much as wine, because that's what I knew, and just kind of, you know, ingratiate yourself with people. And fortunately, for the most part, you know, people in this business, and especially here in Oregon, are welcoming, and you know, that just started the learning curve. And that's why, you know, as I always put it, it's the wine claws got their hooks in me, and I you know, can never get them out. So they sucked me in, and it's started a new path, and it's been a fun path.
Definitely a theme we've come across a time or two, as you know, in our interviews. So let's back up a bit and talk about life before wine. Obviously, some interesting things you touched on there. So tell us about upbringing before all that. Where were you born and raised, and what was your path after, say, high school?
I was born actually in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but I was raised in Los Angeles. I moved there when I was really little, so I'm from LA. And my mom is a concert pianist and was a piano teacher most of her career, and so me and my siblings were forced to play music, essentially. So I grew up playing classical violin, and only in college did I start, or actually in high school I started playing saxophone, and, you know, and got more into jazz and became, you know, more of primarily a saxophonist, came back to strings, and so working professionally, I worked more as a multi-instrumentalist with both strings and woodwinds. What was the other part of the question?
Just sort of career path. What did you do after school?
Yeah, after school, you know, I mean, early school, I studied all kinds of stuff because I wasn't about to be a classical violin major, and instead started other stuff and just played music along the way, and spent a year in Paris, which was part of you know, the whole journey. I lived in France for a year when I was 8, And so went back and spent a college year there, and have been going back ever since. And that's certainly a part of my wine journey. And that we import. One of the primary countries we import from is France. So that's a great part of the story. After finishing my first undergrad degree, I started a second one in music because it was at that point that I was like, okay, I really want to do this. So I started a music degree without really the intention of finishing it. So I just studied for a few years, and then I got out there and started working in music.
Tell me about that path. How do you break in, and what was the kind of the career path in music for you?
Yeah, it's networking. It's ingratiating yourself. I fancied myself after studying music being a dedicated jazz saxophonist, and actually moved to Europe and was in Denmark and France trying to play there, and wasn't really coming together. And so I came back, it was kind of just back, in my mid-20s, and I was kind of figuring out, I'm like, what am I going to do? Am I going to do something different completely? I'm going to keep focusing on music. And just felt like I never really had given it a go in Los Angeles as a professional, even though I played with bands and done a number of gigs. So then I just started networking and just sitting in with everyone I could and just, trying to get work. And that started my whole rock path, and, working as kind of a folk rock multi-instrumentalist, So it was just, getting lucky, meeting the right people, and most importantly, working hard, like most things.
Tell us some of the moments there, or either the tours or albums worked on, or something that you're kind of proudest of, or you look back on most fondly.
Well, I was in a band that had a record deal called The Borrowers, and those are some really proud moments, getting radio airplay and touring around the country and reaching the near breakthrough, but a certain level of breakthrough success and getting some attention, and kind of, this is the kind of weird contemporaries of Counting Crows and the Wallflowers. It's like acoustic rock in the 90s. And so those are some proud moments. But more fun to talk about are touring with some other artists and getting to play some great venues. I was on the first Lilith Fair and toured all over the country with that, and that was a really great experience playing with a ton of musicians and some large venues. But probably the top of the list was somehow ending up doing a guitar solo at Madison Square Garden, which I had no right to do because I barely play guitar, but I was asked to do it, and I figured it out and did it, and that was a lot of fun. And maybe playing Red Rocks Amphitheater in Colorado, it's an incredible venue. And probably playing the Greek Theater in Los Angeles, just because that's right in my home neighborhood I grew up in, so playing a show there and walking home afterwards was pretty stellar. Yeah.
So at that point, you were achieving some success in that world. What prompted the move to Oregon and the career change?
Well, early 2000s, things were kind of slowing up a bit. I'd been touring with Joan Baez for 3 years, and she took some time off after the passing away of her sister. And so I've just put out all my feelers to all the incredible musicians I had met in the last 5-10 years, and looking for more work. And there wasn't a lot of touring work, and even some of the more established players I had met, they're like, yeah, things are really tough right now. So it's just the way it is. And I kind of just felt like, it's as high as the highs can be, you can always, as a side musician, you can always end up just searching for that gig. You're not really, you're just in control of your own destiny. And so I felt like, I want to try something new, and I started working in film music, doing music copying, which is doing sheet music work for composers for feature films. Did that for a few years, but I just felt like I wanted to try something new. I felt kind of, trapped behind the keyboard, that all the performance I'd done, and suddenly I was just working in front of a computer. Of course, later on I would reflect that whatever you do, you end up working in front of a computer for the most part. So it doesn't. It's hard to avoid, especially these days. But anyway, my my wife, or as I said, then girlfriend, we were in my small apartment in Santa Monica looking to make a change. And I had come up here to go skiing with a buddy that lived here. And, I came back and I was like, honey, what about Oregon? Have you spent much time in Portland? And she was like, yeah, I've been there before. I actually thought about moving there a long time ago. I like it. And I was like, let's go have a look-see. And we, sure enough, a month later, came up here, and there it was. Came back to LA. It's like, hey, everybody, we're moving to Oregon in a month, And so we just decided to up and do it. Neither of us knew what we were going to do, but we felt like, that's the adventure we were looking for. We both had lived itinerant lives on our own and traveled a lot, and we were ready for more adventure, and we just felt like this is a good place to try something new. So, we came up here and figured out our path, and that's what led me to working in wine in Oregon.
So you mentioned that wine became something that just kind of got its claws in you and never really let go. So as that was beginning to happen, tell me about the first steps for you into the world of wine. You mentioned you got work in sales. Was that what you hoped to do? Was that just kind of what was there to be done? What were you kind of thinking at that point as you got in, as you kind of dipped your toe in?
It was what I hoped to do. I had two key people that I knew when I was in Los Angeles, one my cousin, another someone who's an established colleague in the business, and those are the only people I knew who worked in the wine business, and I had spoken to both of them, and they both worked on the wholesale side of things, so they kind of had talked to me a bit about this, the side of the business that I've remained in, and so it seemed intriguing and a good path for me, and actually one of them referred me to the two guys that that ended up hiring me. Mm-hmm. So it was a direct referral, and I was just, of course, a complete unknown quantity, but with an interesting background, and that I spoke French. They took a chance on me. Mm-hmm. So I got lucky, really, and got a job selling wine, and just figured it out from there.
So tell us about the first job. You mentioned you're still learning a lot about wine at that point. So tell us about how long it took you to feel comfortable in the role and some of the kind of learning experiences that you had.
Like I said, the people in Oregon are, for the most part, pretty welcoming. There's definitely a few accounts that were screaming at the headquarters going like, why'd you send me this guy? He doesn't know anything. But for the most part, people are pretty accepting, and if you're warm and direct and honest and forthcoming with people, it goes a long way. And so I never really was uncomfortable. It's just more, it took probably 2 years. I remember my boss at the time saying it takes about 2 years to get in good with customers, and that is certainly true. We develop trust, but also, it took me those first 2 years to feel like I had things in my wheelhouse. Those first 2 years, driving down to Eugene and selling down there once a week was my kind of thing, my assignment for the company, like develop Eugene and then also work in the Portland market. So, I did that for over 2 years. And that, developed a lot of great relationships doing that. I had a good time and did a lot of driving. But I'd say about 2 years.
So as you were learning, what kind of wines were you working with at that point, and what kind of wines were you finding yourself drawn to at that point?
That's a good question. So that company was really focused, in French imports, also German and Austrian imports, Italian imports, and Spanish imports. And we also had a range of things from the Southern Hemisphere, and we worked with a lot of Oregon producers, primarily in Washington. So I didn't initially have the opportunity to work with those wines, but after doing a few years selling down in Eugene, I switched to selling in Portland and the Vancouver market. Mm-hmm. And when I did that, then I had the opportunity to work with all these wonderful Oregon wines, and that was a great path of discovery. But and hand in hand with that, there's annual trips to wine regions all around the world, which was a great experience. But I think I've always been drawn to French wines, and that continued, and then the greatest discovery and adventure were with Italian wines and Austrian wines. And not surprisingly, those are a big part of the Prufrock portfolio. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So as you're developing those kinds of relationships, tell me about the what you found to be most successful and some of the sort of the relationship. What were your kind of relationship building keys as you were kind of developing those accounts?
To me, the success in building relationships and success in any sales, but certainly in wine sales, is developing trust and working directly and honestly. And a big part of developing trust is being thorough and reliable. I always took it upon myself. I mean, of course, as I said, coming into it with being quite green, I took it upon myself to do everything I could to make up for that. And so that, a big part of that was being super organized and, keeping a history of wines that I tasted with each account so that I could refer back to it. I still do that. It's just a simple thing, but I learned quickly that not everyone does that, and so it's like someone says, hey, you showed me some wine like 4 months ago and it was a yellow label and I really liked it. Do you know what that was? And I'm like, no idea, thinking, but then I look at the list and I'm like, in that date range, I'm like, oh yeah. And then I remember, and you have a conversation and someone's like, that's great, and those kind of little details make a difference. Even, just carrying your inventory, having your actual stock and having a good picture of it, so when you get into a conversation, it's not like, oh, I don't know if we have that, I'll find out for you and get back to you. If you can, do business on the spot and know what you have to sell, it goes a long way. Mm-hmm. So those kinds of little details of just being trustworthy and straight with people, I found that led me to success.
At that point, with the people you were selling to, what did you find they were looking for? What were the wines they were looking for? What were their clients kind of clamoring for at that point?
Well, that's a long time ago. So at that point, don't know if I can speak to that directly. But, more broadly, I would say that there's such a huge range of what both clients as well as consumers are looking for. I mean, often it's unknown because there's, a level of education. So, and that's usually, often, in the consumer base of not knowing, like someone going into a restaurant, it's like, I want a white or I want a Chardonnay or whatever. And giving the freedom to the sommelier or the wine buyers to shape things how they want and steer people. But often at the client level and the account level, they're just like I was. There's always people coming in that are new, right? So then you have a path of discovery with them and helping educate them and helping explore what they like for their palate and helping them, test things to see what works for their customers. And there's always a broad range, is how I'd answer that. Yeah.
So you mentioned that as you grew in that role, you started taking on more Oregon and started to meet Oregon producers. So tell me your kind of initial impressions of the people you were meeting in Oregon wine and of the wines you were trying at the time.
Well, my initial impressions of the people is just, some of the hardest working, people in show business in this show, But just meeting, so many people that I still know to this day, Jim Prosser and those that have, passed away like Patty Green and just such a long list of, people that we worked with and we're close with. And in terms of the wines, it was a real discovery. I mean, I drink in a certain amount of California wine in California, but again, my orientation was more towards French wine. And so here is, discovering the whole range of what Oregon wine can be and finding some that are, feather light and really high acid and high tone and more, European in kind of approach, and some that are, built with much more structure and weight and volume, which of course can be like a lot of European wines, but, more like California wines. So it's a huge range and, fun path of discovery.
What about the market demand at that point for Oregon wines? What was the demand level for Oregon wines? Where were they selling, and was that changing as you were working with them?
No, I think I would say it's that's been pretty much a continuum. I've always found that there's more demand for Oregon wines here in Portland than Washington wines, let's say, and because I work for a company that was based both in Portland and in Seattle, we've always found the opposite to be true. Up in Seattle, of course, there's more demand for Washington wines, but that said, there is room for a lot of crossover. Local is top of the list, and for good reason. When we all talk about small footprint and eating locally and local farming and farm to table and all these things, and that was going on then too. We're just talking 15, 20 years ago, and everyone's conscious of carbon footprint, and when you're talking about bringing wines from Europe, it's kind of it's a big departure from that. But you're as I always purport, it's you're sharing culture from around the world. So it's more than just a single beverage. It's not like importing a gallon of milk from France because you like that it's French. Cheese is the same thing. It's like here we have a lot of French cheese here in the U.S. and here in Portland we all enjoy it. I do. Italian cheese, what have you. Mm-hmm. But they all have unique qualities, and characters, and so that they inspire local cheesemakers, domestic cheesemakers as well. So there's similarities there, of course, with wine.
So what was the next step for you as you grew into that space? What did you do next?
After
you had your first job, and you mentioned how it kind of evolved. So what was the next step for you?
Right. So that company dealt with some issues between the two partners, and so it ended up splitting up in 2010. I remained with the Seattle entity for a couple years, but then that folded as well. So it was a couple years there that I was kind of figuring out what I was going to do next, and I considered leaving the wine business, and that's why I refer to the wine clause, because I just got an MBA, and I was kind of thinking about perhaps getting back into music, or trying something completely different. And so I did a range of job inquiries and interviews for all kinds of things. But nothing panned out, and which I'm happy about now, because it kind of led me to a path for a year of working for one of my current importers and representing their wines on the East Coast as well as locally and in Washington, and traveling with them to Austria and kind of getting a view of the real importer market nationally. Mm-hmm. So I did that for about a year. Then as that was coming through to a year point, we needed to have a new home here for those wines, and it was at that point that I decided to launch Prufrock Wines. As I thought, I should just do this myself. I know this wine. I've just visited all these wineries, and just start the company exclusively with these Austrian wines, which is kind of really nuts, but with the intention, say, it'll be a very focused book initially, and I'll leverage all my, relationships and, rely on those to launch, and people will, hopefully want to buy the wines because they'll appreciate working with me directly, and that'll be a starting point, and then from there I'll build all the French and Italian imports, which I did, over the first year. So it kind of was like a starting point, and then a growth curve from there to start bringing on imports and grow Prufrock. And Prufrock Wines was started in 2014, so we're 8 years in. And we are about 70-75% direct imports of French and Italian wines, and all of our French and Italian wines are imported directly from those wineries, mm-hmm. In France or Italy. And then we have a whole cadre of wines from Austria, Slovenia, Croatia, Hungary, Bosnia, and now even possibly a new Serbian producer is going to be coming along. But these are all wines that are from two importers and their books, and so for all those wines, and that's about 30% of our products. We're the distributor for those wines, and we either get them directly from Europe or off the East Coast.
So as you started, you mentioned Austria as the focus first because of sort of the timing of what you did when you did the work. Tell me about the wines that you were attracted to start with. What did you choose to start the company with when you were looking at Austria specifically? And as you progressed, what were you looking for with what you wanted to distribute?
Well, starting a wholesale company, you always need to have a focus on balance of products that hit different segments of the market. So that's to some extent based on price point. So that's that you have for restaurants some things that can be served by the glass and some things that are served by the bottle. Same thing for retail, things that will hit a certain price point of $15 or $20 on the shelf versus things that are reach above that. So in terms of picking the selection of wines, it's picking things that hit that balance, and give you a good range of things in those lower tiers, because those are going to be the things that build your momentum and your volume, both for selling as well as for reordering. And then hand in hand with that is a balance of shades, shall we say, white, rosé, sparkling red, etc. And finding that balance, which there's some seasonality in there, of course, so those two layers overlapped, and of course continue that to this day. It's a big part of running a wholesale business and keeping everything flowing.
So you mentioned the two big cogs there. You have the restaurant and you have the retail. So tell me about the differences in working with the two different sides, based on what you're bringing to the table and how it is that you're interacting with the kind of the buyers on those sides.
I've always felt like for some in the business, there's a perception that the two are very divided. I mean, there's some larger companies where you have a on-premise or restaurant specialist who just focus on selling those kinds of wines versus retail, and that the two worlds are quite distinct. Myself, I've never found it to be so much so, or at least perhaps here in the Oregon market. Certainly, you have those buyers that move from one to the other, and it's usually not the case. People that work in restaurants usually stay in restaurants, etc. But you do see that someone's working at this wine shop and then now they're at a restaurant, and it's just it's more of a fluid environment. And for me, in selling the wines, it's equally so. I mean, certainly, like we were talking about, talking about things that can sell by the glass. You want to look at that, but it's the same thing on the retail level. There's things that at that same price point can move in big chunks because someone has a wine club, or they put it in their newsletter. So it's really to me apples to apples. I mean, they're different worlds, but in terms of a wholesale approach and a selling approach, the two sit next to each other quite nicely. A lot of companies that are larger, in the wholesale business sell, much larger volume to retail than restaurants. It's kind of a typical formula. I know that was the case with my other company. With Prufrock, pre-pandemic, I shall say, we have always been about 50-50 restaurant retail, which is great, and I feel privileged to have that, and have those kinds of relationships with restaurateurs and somms. Of course, going into the pandemic, that got completely thrown on its head. Everything closing. So we had through that first year of the pandemic, we had to pivot completely and shift away from restaurants, almost entirely, of course. And then it's through restaurants reopening over the last year and a half, it's been a great growth opportunity, because after that pivoting, and selling, focusing more on retail, as things reopen, we're able to keep things going more robustly with retail and grow with all the restaurants reopening. So it's been we've been fortunate.
Tell me about some of the first couple of years of Prufrock. What were some of the early successes you had? At what point did you think you had something that was going to last?
Last week? No, a little longer than that. But Yeah, the first, I grew it really organically. I mean, it was just on my own. Initially, I was just doing all my own deliveries. And even in that first year, I felt like this is something that could last. I could continue to grow this, until, until we moved here to this space, because initially we were actually warehousing with our friends at Bow and Arrow with Scott Frank, and so we had a very small cage about this area that we're standing in right now. It's like a few hundred square feet of wine, and moved here, and we have over 2,000 square feet here. So this has given us the room to stretch out, and we've been here about 5 years now. And so this, I think, moving into this space and increasing ordering dramatically over that next year and selling through and seeing us succeed in growing that much. In that next year, we grew about 50% in that year following moving here, and there's been growth since then. But I think it was that first year of moving here, to specifically answer the question, that would be where that felt like it could continue.
You mentioned that your kind of French wine was kind of your main passion, and that's like the bulk. It seems like the bulk of your work now is coming from France. Tell me about discovering new things in France and what you're kind of trying to portray with the portfolio you've built here, specifically around French wine.
Yeah, I mean, I will add that we sell probably an equal amount of Italian wine to French wine, maybe even more Italian, depending on the year. And so we're I think known for both French and Italian. But what was the question specifically about the French wine?
Well, now I'm going to rephrase it because you gave me a chance to. So with French and then an Italian wine, what is it you're trying to portray as you build the portfolio and you're discovering new things? What is it you're trying to make sure that you're portraying with the wines you have in your assortment here?
We always, I would say we're just trying to portray honest wines, and that's a big term, but, just wines that are made at a smaller scale. Our wine, as with many small importers, our wines are predominantly organic or biodynamic, generally naturally made. But, I think overall we're, trying to represent wines that are healthy products in that sense of being organic and not manipulated wines. But overall, we really focus on in that spectrum of wines that are made naturally, of clean wines, wines that are really well made and that you wouldn't necessarily know are natural. We do have some things that are, I would say, that drink nattier than others, but for the most part, it kind of make that distinction. And this, again, is a vague and broadly interpreted term in terms of natural wines in this business. But I, refer to natural wines and then natty wines in terms of whether, how they drink. Yeah, so I'd say that would be it. And that's true for both France and Italy.
So I'm curious about the demand for those wines specifically, and how much it's changed in the especially in the 8 years of Prufrock. Obviously, a lot of things in Portland have changed. A lot of things in Oregon have changed in terms of wine production, but also wine demand. So I'm curious, from your perspective, how have those changes kind of resonated with what you're doing?
Yeah, in particular, the last couple years, there's a huge demand for skin contact wines. And, these are also called orange wines. Back in the day, we the company I worked for before, we all loved these wines and worked with a number of them. I still work with some of the same producers and work with some of the same wines. But currently, there is just a huge appreciation for this. I mean, in the past, you never have... it seems like most wine lists that I see now, at restaurants have a rosé orange or rosé skin contact section. Never had that before. It's just rosé, if there's a rosé section on the list. So it's great to see, this expansion of interest in these wines. And it's fun to be able to, explore them. And hats off to actually one of our Eastern European importers that really has done a great job of sourcing them from both Slovenia and Croatia, kind of primarily Slovenia. And so they're well priced, and we're able to keep them in stock because they come off the East Coast. So it's been a real boon to our work with restaurants to have these, because they've been hot commodities. And in the current environment of wine wholesale, as with many things, supply chain is just so critical. Shipping, etc. We can get into that, but. So having things in stock is just an absolute key to success, and so it's there's ups and downs of that for sure, but because we've had that cadre of skin contact stuff that's pretty well priced, that's been just like one more little box to stand on, and it's helped.
Well, yeah, let's talk about the last couple of years then. So you brought up 2020 already and supply chain. So tell me about early 2020 as things are starting to change. Tell me about the decisions you had to make and the pivots you had to make, and the specific challenges of the past couple of years for you.
Yeah, there's been a number of them. You've probably talked with some other individuals about all the tariffs that were in play and the changes through that, and so that was a couple different layers and levels of things to navigate and deal with, and those certainly impacted ordering, because for example, you're like, okay, I'm going to get hit by a tariff on this item if it's above 14%, but that other wine that I didn't used to work with from this producer, okay, that's going to it's going to come into the market for lower now, and that one's going to have a hit. I'm going to have to raise the price. All these decisions. So it certainly impacted ordering in that sense. And then in the current environment, especially since the war in Ukraine and all the rise in gas prices and just shipping containers, as I'm sure you've as well have talked about. It's just been this world, this nightmare world, and shipping costs have gone basically at least double. And so then like tariffs fell away, but shipping costs are just astronomical. Let alone shipping timelines. Things that would take 2, maybe maximum 3 months to get here from Europe now are 4 to 6 months. And literally, I've had a good number of orders this year that take 6 months or even a little bit longer. And it's just a complete insanity that it can take that long for wines to get here. You're waiting on these products. But everyone's dealing with that, and you hear a lot about it in the market. So when you do get things in, it does create a little bit more of a feast and famine situation where your buyers know, like, okay, everyone's going to pounce on this if you're bringing in products that are desirable, and hopefully you are. But so it's like, okay, these are here, get them while they're here, and then things get gobbled up. So that helps, but you're trying to find that balance of having things that people want to work with and then keeping them in stock. So yeah, big part of it, in terms of what we do over the last couple of years is just realizing, okay, I have to have about 3 to 4 times as much wine on order at any one time. The list is just crazy, and you're like, and it's scary initially, because you're kind of like, how can I have this much wine on order? But the thing is, you're like, I don't know when any of this is going to come. And sometimes it all comes. I've had a few times where it's like we're just completely maxed out, But again, then you have a lot of wine to sell. And it's just become part of the flow of it, of these unknowns, and just ordering up and hoping it all works out. It's a little bit of crossing your fingers for sure, and kind of you keep riding with it, and it all it does. I think my experience over the last 18 years is helps in this regard, because kind of a lot of it is by feel. It's in times like this where you can't do the standard analysis of looking at any one given item or a category and go, oh, what have the sales been for the last 2 years? Let me order based on that. It's like, well, there's these huge reasons, that, you'd have to scrub out. And, so that therefore you end up just at the point you're like, what do I feel like we should do on this? And I'm in that position over and over with things. You're kind of like, okay, let's try it this way. Let's try it that way in terms of what you're going to order. So it's in times like this, I'm glad I've been doing it for as long as I have. Yeah.
Sort of the micro ferments of wine sales.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of little buckets around hoping for the best.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah. That's good. You mentioned obviously the regions outside of France and Italy, Slovenia and Hungary and Austria and others. Croatia. Thank you. Yes, I'm curious about those the growth of those as wine regions that are less known by most people here. You mentioned them some of them being very hot right now. So I'm curious how much that's changed and how your role in like getting those wines here has changed.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating actually. I went to Croatia and Slovenia a few years back. I think it was 3 years ago, maybe 4. But I learned that Croatia had just joined the EU recently, and that there was throughout Europe there was a lot. I'd seen there was much more, and here, promotion of travel to Croatia. More people were going, and by learning that they had just joined the EU, I was like, okay, that's why we're seeing all this marketing. It's like the EU is going like, okay, let's get people, like we're in Croatia as well. They're taking advantage of this, right? Which is great. But we did start to see that on the ground here, where little by little, I just have retailers, say like, hey, I got a customer that just came. They just were in Croatia. They had some wine. They're looking for this, and then if one time that happens. And it's once in a blue moon in the past, and then it just started happening a little more, and then people know like, oh, you have, like your retailers know like, oh, you have these things, and they turn to you. So I think there's been more of a tourist path of discovery for some of these parts of the world, and that's been part of it. And the other part of it is that just even without traveling there, not everybody. Some people like to, eat the same thing, drink the same thing every day. But for many people, they like discovery, and whether that's, a sommelier wanting to put some new things on the wine list, or just, consumers that like to try new things and ask for new things at wine shops that feature new things. So having new countries where previously we've seen very little wine, it opens up this path of discovery. I mean, we've certainly seen this. We don't sell any Georgian wines ourselves, but I've seen this in the market. People are just really loving and discovering Georgian wines, which is fantastic. These are the oldest wines in the world. And there's just many places like that where, just it's a path of discovery, and people love that.
So you mentioned 18 years in the wine business. In that time, what are the changes you've seen kind of in overall when it comes to either wine sales or customer demands, or are there kind of big shifts that have happened in that time and what people are looking for, or how you're providing them, or has it stayed roughly the same?
I feel like it stayed roughly the same. I feel like that can't be so. And I'm trying to put my finger on some of the big shifts because they must be out there. I think one shift. I wouldn't call it as huge or monumental, but rosé has certainly become more of a year-round commodity, and wine, which is great. In the business, we all love rosé and drink it all year, whatever, especially some that are more structured. But it definitely always had more, limited seasonal appeal, and now it sells more. Hand in hand with that, I think, critically, is the changed weather here in Oregon and in many places. I mean, I know when I moved here, people would say like, oh, you don't need AC, it's only hot 3 weeks out of the year, and sure enough it would rain about 9 months. You talk about June gloom, and it was rainy all June. Now it's like, I tell people when they ask, they're like, oh, how can you live in Oregon, it's so rainy, it's like, yeah, it's really brutal, but it's only brutal for like 3 to 6 months, and really, it's like, 6 months of the year it's pretty sunny and warm, and too warm if anything, and so that affects wine drinking, definitely in terms of whites and skin contact and rosé. There is a lot more opportunity because there's a lot more sun year round, and even when you can't have sun in the sky, you can have it in your sun in the glass, right? That's what we say.
So obviously, we talked a little bit before the interview. You're not obviously focused on Oregon wine specifically, but you do have some Oregon wine in your portfolio. You've represented over the years. Yeah. So I'm curious. Again, you mentioned kind of your initial impressions of Oregon wine. Tell me about its progression in your eyes. What have you seen change in Oregon wine, and what has led you to represent the wine that you do under Prufrock?
Yeah, I've seen overall changes in Oregon wine. A more exploration of, with certain wineries, exploration of appellations throughout Oregon, as well as an exploration of different varieties. And that always, existed to a certain extent, but there's definitely a lot more of that going on, which I love. Those producers that are really championing and bottling, doing varietal wines of all kinds of obscure grapes and different AVAs and treating the wines differently, and taking grapes from Southern Oregon, and as opposed to just making a bigger wine because it's warmer down there, instead doing doing pet nats and doing lighter wines and all kinds of a whole range of things, which I think is fantastic, and enjoy exploring those wines. And then the other biggest shift that I've seen is just I would speak to the success of Oregon Chardonnay. I know that for myself, way back, even this, not focusing on drinking a lot of Oregon wine, but I always kind of had a feeling that it's like, God, I love Oregon Chardonnays. I feel like there's a lot of potential there someday, and it's been great to see over the last 20 years, see that evolve organically, to some extent, and those producers that have really focused on it, it's been wonderful to see that evolution. The two producers that we represent really came into our portfolio entirely organically. One is Timothy Malone, and Tim and I are good friends, and we play music together, and we played in this band with a few other people in the wine business, and just at a gig, we're just talking shop about wine and whatnot, and learned, and this is years ago, just learned that he really was focused on retail with his wines, and just didn't have the bandwidth to really get into restaurants and spend the time tasting with somms and whatnot. And I said, well, keep all your retail and let me just try selling some stuff at restaurants. Why don't we do like a kind of some hybrid thing and just see how that goes? And that evolved, and it was really a win-win for both of us. And since then, in the last couple of years, or more recently, Tim's moved down closer to the valley, and we've taken over the whole portfolio for him in terms of selling here in Portland. So that's been great. But he's a good buddy and doing great work, both with his own wines as well as now as the head winemaker at J. Christopher. And the other is Sheba Wishern, and with that is just simply seeing Akiko's wines at some really cool places a few years ago, and just being curious, and as I do occasionally with various winemakers, say, hey, just DM them up, as I guess you could say. Is that a phrase? But like, hey, I'd love to barter some wine, love to try your wines, this is what we have, we could trade 6-packs or something, and people are usually open to that, and that just led to a conversation of like, oh, your wines are fantastic, someday if you're looking for distribution, they said, well, that's some days now, actually. So that started that conversation, and they came into our book a little while back, and it's been great working with them. So yeah, like so many things, it's just been a kind of a organic development of partnerships.
Do you have intention of building more in that Oregon portfolio, or is it just kind of as it comes up, it comes up?
As it comes up, it comes up. It always is an important part of being a successful wholesaler, is having some local products, and I know that. So it's, I could seek out more, we could seek out more, but it is kind of more like, it makes more sense for us to let things evolve organically, and for all of our wines, we bring things on, because they make sense, they feel right for Prufrock, and as well as, of course, a bit of market need. I mean, of course, they have to feel right, but also, be something that your customer's going to want and appreciate. So, yeah,
So with Oregon Wine, you mentioned the changes you've seen. What does the industry look like to you as you kind of look at it in 2022, and what comes next for the Oregon wine industry from your perspective?
That's hard to say. We are seeing a lot of money coming into the valley, so to answer what comes next, that comes next, I would say, and so that's, a bit cautionary perhaps, because I think we all feel like, be careful, or, what have you. Overall, I think, development and growth is good. I mean, I'm from a big city. I'm not from a farming place. And so it's not that I would want Portland to become Los Angeles by any means. But a lot of people bemoan that people that are from here, like, oh, Portland's this is putting aside all the issues with COVID and demonstrations, but just in terms of growth of the city, sure, there's challenges, and any city's growing, and how it's done and how it's managed, and homelessness is absolutely a terrible problem here in Portland. But overall, though, those things, and you can't cast them aside, but just the notion of the city growing and there being more people here. I know that when I moved here, I felt like, oh, this is like the last affordable place on the West Coast, and people are going to hear that and say, like, you're one of the problems, you're from LA, and you led that. But I know that this is the nature. I mean, when I moved here 20 years ago, I met many Californians who were like, oh, I moved here 20 years ago. I moved here in the 60s. And now I'm one of those veterans that when someone moves here now, I'm like, oh, I moved here 20 years ago. And I laugh at myself for that reason. But, it's normal. People, move all directions. I mean, I know people from here that move to Los Angeles, younger people, whatever, and same with Seattle. I mean, people move around. So, and cities grow. So I think that's really natural, and so I think there is going to be growth in the wine industry, to bring it back to wine, of course. But you do see it presents a lot of challenges when you have big wineries from California coming in and putting down big roots and taking over a lot of grapes that previously were the sources of grapes for some smaller producers, and a lot of my friends, and I know and I hear from them bemoaning, like, wow, I just lost my source for Malone, or lost this or whatever because someone took it over and they're doing this and they're replanting it. So I think there's going to be a fair amount of that. Those people that just want to come in and they're going to plant Chardonnay and Pinot and the things that make money. There's that. But they're hand in hand with that. We can hope that there are people that are able to stick to their path and grow what they want to grow, and work with smaller producers, and hopefully we'll continue to see a balance, some sort of balance therein. That's what I'd like to see.
So you talked earlier about kind of one of the big seminal moments for Prufrock being moving into this space and being able to expand and grow. So I'm curious, along the way up to now, are there other moments along the way that you look back on, or particular growth opportunities that you've sort of seized upon in the past couple of years?
Well, I would say that bringing on the second importer of Slovenian and Croatian wine, that certainly was an opportunity. It's something that I wasn't seeking, and this importer reached out to me and said, I see what you're doing, and you have Austrian wines and you don't have what we carry. And at the time I remember feeling like, I already sell a lot of Austrian wine, I don't need more difficult to sell wines, more wines that people don't know. I should stick with France and Italy because these are just more challenges. People don't want that much Slovenian or Croatian wine. But fair enough, you kind of look at the other side of it and you go, you know what? Looking at their products and seeing what other states they're in, you're like, someone's probably going to have these products. Maybe they're good. Maybe I should look at them. Maybe we should look at them, see how they taste, because otherwise, a competitor's going to have them, right? You're like, fair shake. So, all right, yeah, sure, why don't you send me a box of wine? Let's check them out. Do that step, try the wines, love a lot of them, and go like, oh, well, actually, this is really good. And then that even turns it farther. You're like, well, definitely someone else is going to pick them up if I don't. We can be selling these wines. This is an opportunity. So something that you weren't necessarily seeking sometimes lands in your lap as an opportunity. And as I've already spoken to, it ends up being a great partnership, and those wines are providing a certain base of stability during tough times. So because of all the shipping challenges, and they have their own challenges, and certain things have been in and out of stock, but it's we're all weathering that. So yeah, it's an interesting path and journey.
So let's talk about what comes next then. You're 8 years into Prufrock, sort of coming out of a pandemic maybe at some point here.
Yeah, I know, right?
Tell me about what the next couple of years and down the road you're kind of looking ahead to. Are there goals you have in mind? Are there opportunities you're seeking out as you look ahead? Yeah,
there's, having weathered the pandemic as we have, I think there's growth opportunities for Prufrock. in the years ahead. How to navigate them, remains to be seen. So we're figuring that out at this time. So they're not set goals, but it's more, again, as it evolves, feeling that out organically and figuring out the right path for growth.
Is there anything you are excited to try, a region you haven't tried yet, or an up-and-coming trend that you're seeing that you're excited to check out next?
I hear there's some really great wines from the moon that are going to be hitting the market. I really... of course, having been doing this for a little while, I can't say there are specific wines that I've never tried that I'm excited to try. I'm sure there are, of course there are, right? But in terms of, specific growth opportunities, I mean, again, as the company grows, I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to grow into Spain, for example. I used to sell Spanish wines. I love Spanish wines. We just, as opposed to trying to do all things, we've limited it to what we do. So I think right there, that's an area where it's more of an obvious area, both Spain and Portugal, I would say. And then even, within the countries we work in, there's always room for more growth and discovery, from other regions, but also just within the regions you already work with and finding new producers. So there's certainly that as well. German wines, I used to sell German wines. We don't sell any German wines, but there as well, there's opportunity for growth and challenge as well. As those wines can be, challenging to sell, but they're wonderful. But again, because we do so much Austrian up until now, it's like, let's just focus on that and, not tackle that as well. We recently were approached by a Georgian portfolio, and so we did look at that and decided it wasn't the right fit for now. It's kind of a growing portfolio, so they're helping. I mean, they're just kind of getting it together, I would say, and figuring out the right mix for their portfolio. Greece as well. There's been some opportunities for importing, bringing in a Greek portfolio. And I think that could be interesting. So there's certainly, and that's an area I've really sold very little Greek wine ever. So that would be a cool path to discovery as well.
It's interesting as you talk about all those places and the places you already sell from and the places you're thinking about, that there is enough demand to even consider that. There's enough demand for those kinds of wines to even be able to consider that here in Oregon.
Well, yeah, I know. That's the perfect example. I mean, this Greek portfolio, for example, that I've considered, and it's kind of felt the same way. I was like, I don't see that much Greek wine, but then sometimes you do see some really great Greek wines in some great places, restaurants and whatnot, and try them and order them because you're curious. You're like, this is fantastic. But that's a different equation when you're thinking about carrying a portfolio and having it in the warehouse. And you're like, okay, how much are people going to do? How much sustained purchasing and consumption of these wines are we going to see? So it's hard to know, and it's easier with some of my Eastern European stuff because I'm already working with the importer, and they're like, hey, we have a new Bosnian producer, and it's like, okay, well then you can just bring in a few things with everything else you're already doing, so it's not bringing on a whole new entity, which presents its challenges and along with opportunities. Yeah.
So outside of wine, any plans for yourself in the future? Have anything in your kind of a non-wine life that you're excited about or looking forward to?
I just look forward to growing with my family. I have two kids, one who are 12 and 8, and they're really into music and all kinds of activities, of course. So it's great, for my wife and I, seeing them grow up and doing it here, and that along with living the Oregon lifestyle, which is so great, and being able to eat well and have an outdoor life. So just appreciate that we have all that, and through all this time as well, that we have our health. Yeah.
And not to put you on the spot too much, but I'm curious if, with the professional music background that you have, is that an itch that ever comes back? Do you have any plans on perhaps performing again or anything like that?
Oh, I do perform a little bit from time to time. Actually, recently, Tim and I, he's a bass player, and the four-piece group that we were in before fell apart, but he and I do jazz duo gigs. Often they're wine related at various bars or restaurants, and we played recently at Maurice Restaurant, and we played at Frank Wine Bar and at Beso and Lake Oswego. Those are just 3 in the last few months, but yeah, we occasionally do gigs. So still have my hand in it.
Excellent. All right, that's all the questions that I have for you. Anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we needed to cover here that we didn't cover?
I think so.
All right.
I think we're pretty comprehensive.
Excellent. Well, before we wrap up, we are going to get a little performance from you on the camera before we go here. So thank you so much for this part of the interview. Thank you for your hospitality and for sharing your story with us.
Yeah, again, thanks for having me.
Excellent. And we'll go ahead and pause real quick and let you set up, and we'll fire up the camera.
All right. So I thought it would be fun to end the interview with just one little jazz tidbit. And this is an old jazz standard, which is called My One and Only Love. So, gotta know what's that all about, right?
Awesome.